Welcome to The Explainer. Let's just dive right in because today we are exploring something that literally affects every single one of us, the fascinating and honestly sometimes totally baffling world of human behavior. Have you ever wondered why you do the things you do? Or, why you feel certain emotions so intensely in very specific situations? Well, today we're going to unpack the exact tools that professionals use to answer those kinds of questions. Comedian Jerry Seinfeld once pointed out this amazing absurdity about human nature. He joked that to the average person at a funeral, you're actually better off in the casket than doing the eulogy. It's funny, sure, but it's actually rooted in a very real psychological fact. Public speaking consistently ranks at the absolute top of our list of human fears. It sits right up there alongside death, heights, and snakes. So, that brings us to our ultimate puzzle for today. Why? Why on earth do we fear public speaking when there is absolutely no actual physical danger? I mean, it's not like the audience is literally going to eat you, right? To solve this puzzle, we have to look to psychology. But here's the thing. Psychology doesn't just have one simple answer. Instead, it relies on 7 distinct lenses or perspectives. Throughout this explainer, we're going to use these 7 lenses to examine this exact fear of public speaking, showing you how each unique approach explains why we think and act the way we do. Section 1. Unconscious minds and observable actions. Let's start with 2 of the earliest historical perspectives in psychology. And what's really wild here is how this second perspective we'll look at was born as a direct, aggressive rebellion against the first one. So first up is the psychodynamic perspective, which traces its roots back to the early 1900s and the very famous Sigmund Freud. Think of your mind kind of like a massive iceberg. That tiny little bit peeking above the water, that's what you're actually aware of. But that massive hidden chunk below the surface represents your unconscious mind. Freud argued that this hidden part is just filled with primitive drives, repressed memories, and unresolved conflicts from our early childhood, and that these things actually control our actions today. Like if you've ever witnessed a sudden, intense bout of road rage and wondered, whoa, what from their past caused so much anger? Congratulations, you're asking a psychodynamic question. Now, applying this first lens to our stage fright puzzle, why the fear? Well, a psychodynamic theorist wouldn't even look at the stage. They'd look straight at your past. They'd argue that this fear is completely driven by the unconscious mind, rooted in a deep, unresolved childhood conflict. It could be, say, a repressed memory of being heavily rejected or belittled by an overbearing parent or a strict teacher when you were just a kid. You push that traumatic memory way down into the abyss, but it bubbles right back up as paralyzing panic the absolute second you step up to a microphone. Now, as you might guess, not everyone agreed with Freud. In fact, early behaviorists completely rejected the psychodynamic view. They argued, hey, you can't see or measure the unconscious mind. To make psychology a true, measurable science, they believed we needed to completely ignore the unobservable mind and focus strictly on the objective environment and observable actions. And that brings us to the behavioral perspective. Pioneered by figures like John Watson and B.F. Skinner, this lens argues that we are shaped entirely by our environment through learning, or what they call conditioning. Basically, we do things because we're reinforced or rewarded, and we avoid things because we're punished. Think about why a cat or a young kid won't touch a hot stove twice. They learn pretty quickly from the painful experience. Or think about why a student works super hard just for some verbal praise from a teacher. It is all about observable learning. So, how does a behaviorist view the whole stage fright thing? Well, they don't care about your hidden childhood trauma at all. To a behaviorist, humans are just responding to environmental stimuli. Your fear is simply a result of negative conditioning. Picture this. Maybe you gave a presentation in middle school, you misspoke, and the audience chuckled at you. That embarrassment? That was a punishment. Now you avoid public speaking simply to avoid experiencing that punishment again. It's just straightforward learned avoidance. Section 2. Internal thoughts and free will. As psychology evolved, a lot of people felt that being controlled by hidden traumas or just basic environmental punishments was, well, kind of robotic and depressing. So the focus shifted back inward, but with a much more optimistic view of the human mind. Enter the humanistic perspective, often called the third wave of psychology. Back in the 1960s, thinkers like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers rejected those older deterministic views. The big themes here are free will, choice, and positive growth.
Humanists fundamentally believe that human nature is inherently positive. We aren't just blindly reacting to the world, we're actively making choices to reach our highest potential, a concept Maslow famously called self-actualization. It's all about showing unconditional warmth and encouraging people to live their absolute best lives.
So, what's the humanistic take on that terrifying podium? It's basically a glass half full mentality. They view fear not as some fatal weakness, but as a powerful motivator. A humanist would argue that we purposely seek out difficult tasks, like, say, giving a toast at a crowded wedding, precisely to overcome our fears. It's an opportunity for personal growth and a chance to triumph over adversity. Honestly, it's a remarkably empowering way to look at human behavior.
Next up, we're shifting back to the mind, but definitely not the hidden unconscious one this time. The cognitive perspective is all about conscious thought. It can really be summarized in one word: thinking. This lens focuses on how we process information, remember things, and crucially, how we interpret situations. There was this famous prank where an elevator floor was actually a video screen that made it look like the floor was suddenly dropping out. The people inside immediately jumped back in pure terror. Now, it wasn't the physical environment that made them jump. The floor was completely solid. It was their conscious mind's interpretation of falling that drove their action. Applying that cognitive lens to stage fright is super interesting. You see, you aren't just a headless zombie reacting to a crowd. Your behavior is influenced by your own conscious, and let's face it, sometimes totally irrational thoughts. The cognitive view argues that public speaking fear is driven by this loud internal critic, constantly whispering obsessive what-ifs. What if they see me sweating? What if I trip? What if my zipper is down? The situation itself actually isn't scary. It's your thoughts about the situation that are making it terrifying.
Section 3, Biology, Evolution, and Society.
For our final 3 lenses, we are going to zoom way in and then zoom way, way out, exploring how our physical bodies, our ancient ancestors, and our modern cultures basically dictate what we do. Let's start by zooming in with the biological perspective. If you remember one phrase, make it this: everything psychological is simultaneously biological. This is the neuroscience or medical model. It argues that our thoughts and actions are directly controlled by our physical hardware, our genetics, our nervous system, hormones, and the actual physical structures of our brain. For example, if you notice you always get a terrible cold right around midterms, a biological psychologist would study how that chronic psychological stress is physically impairing your immune system.
Closely related to that is the evolutionary perspective, which is heavily grounded in Charles Darwin's theories. While biology looks at the how, evolution looks at the why. Like, why do humans even behave this way to begin with? They look to natural selection, adaptation, survival, and reproduction. For instance, why do humans feel such intense jealousy? Well, an evolutionary psychologist would suggest that jealousy was actually a highly adaptive trait for our ancient ancestors. It helped them secure mates and ward off rivals just to ensure their genes got passed on. Let's bring these 2 scientific lenses together to diagnose our public speaking fear. On the left side, the biological lens looks at the mechanics. Your amygdala, which is this tiny almond-shaped structure in your brain, detects a threat and triggers physical changes, just dumping stress hormones like cortisol and norepinephrine right into your blood. But on the right side, the evolutionary lens explains why that's even happening. Your ancient brain literally misinterprets the audience staring at you as a life or death situation. To your deep evolutionary programming, standing alone in front of a staring crowd is exactly the same as facing down a saber-toothed tiger. It activates a primal fight or flight survival mode.
Zooming all the way out now, we hit our 7th and final lens, the sociocultural perspective. This takes the broadest view possible, arguing that you simply cannot understand human behavior without looking at the society and the culture surrounding that human. They study norms, social interactions, and how big categories like gender, race, or socioeconomic class impact us. For example, researchers using this lens will map out regional poverty patterns to understand exactly why specific geographical areas have radically different physical and mental health outcomes. We are just so deeply shaped by the world we live in. So, for our final look at public speaking, the sociocultural view highlights that our fear is heavily dictated by complex cultural rules. Every single society has implicit rules, known as folkways, regarding stuff like appropriate eye contact, how much emotion is acceptable to show, and even what hand gestures mean. Plus, someone raised in a highly individualistic culture like the United States might feel this terrifying, isolating pressure to succeed perfectly on their own stage, compared to someone from a collectivist culture where the group dynamic totally shifts that pressure.
All right, section 4, the biopsychosocial model. Okay, so we've looked at 7 totally different ways to explain the exact same fear. And I know what you're thinking. The ultimate question everyone asks right about now is, well, which perspective is right? The answer is beautifully simple.
None of them, or rather all of them. Human behavior is just vastly too complex for a single lens. Modern psychology universally adopts what is known as the biopsychosocial model. This is an eclectic view that pulls from biology, psychology, and social influences. It argues that to truly understand why people think and act the way they do, you must see all 7 of these perspectives as interacting, interrelated, and deeply connected. They are all just different pieces of the exact same puzzle.
Think of this breakdown right here as your master cheat sheet. To really lock this information in, you just need to associate the core keywords with a perspective. Psychodynamic, that's the unconscious past. Behavioral, environmental conditioning. Humanistic, free will and choice. Cognitive, conscious thinking. Biological, the physical brain and genes. Evolutionary, survival and adaptation. And sociocultural, that's all about societal norms. Take a mental snapshot of this. It really is the perfect map to human psychology.
All right, let's put that cheat sheet to the test with a rapid review. Active recall is absolutely the best way to solidify what you've just learned. I've got 2 quick questions for you. First, which perspective focuses on the role of adaptive behavior? Think about survival here. And second, which one studies how the environment shapes how we learn through rewards and punishments? Got your answers in your head?
If you said evolutionary for the first one and behavioral for the second, you absolutely nailed it. You now possess the very analytical tools that psychologists use every single day. And the coolest part is, the biopsychosocial model isn't just for studying stage fright, it applies to literally everything we do. So I'll leave you with this provocative thought. Now that you know the 7 lenses, the next time you feel a really intense emotion or catch yourself repeating a bizarre habit, which perspective will you use to finally understand your own behavior? Thanks for joining.